Hello and welcome to another Geography GCSE Learning from Home session. This one is Lesson 8, looking at specifically the biome of the tropical rainforest. So this one is going to give you a good introduction to the characteristics of the tropical rainforests and looking specifically at their soil, their nutrients and their structure. So, tropical rainforests, in essence, are the most productive biome, so they're very, very high energy, and that's largely because of their consistently high temperatures and their consistent precipitation. So they are literally the perfect places and the perfect conditions for plant life. Now, that plant life helps to form the basis of all the environments and habitats that lots and lots of different species like to live in. So they are one of the most biodiverse, i.e. the most variety of living organisms, certainly the most biodiverse terrestrial, so land-based ecosystem that exists. So we're going to be looking at those in a lot more detail. If you get onto 365, there is a resource saved for you to complete, which has got all the structure for all these different sections, and hopefully I'll talk you through these sessions as if you were in school for a normal lesson. So the first thing I would do is just get an introduction to what tropical rainforests are, so a brief one, and that you can find on this slide here in the box just to the left, and get that down in what tropical rainforests are like in general. But we are going to be covering a great deal more detail with regards to tropical rainforests because a Year 7 or a Year 8 student can tell you that tropical rainforests are hot and wet, generally speaking, and have lots of plants. So as GCSE students, we need to go into quite a bit more depth and look at more of the detailed characteristics that you might expect ready for an exam answer. Okay, so if to begin with you could just attempt this exam question. This is just to give you a little bit of practice on more exam questions, but also to see if you can recognise some of the key things that could be asked in an exam. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to think about it. I'm not going to stop talking for a minute, but you can pause the screen and then I'm going to go through and give you some support later on. Okay, so pause the screen now and see if you can pick apart this question and think about what you might write for it. Okay, so hopefully you recognised a couple of command words in there, and it would be quite rare and unlucky really if you got a question in Edexcel Geography A with command words, double command words in it I should say, but there are two in this one. So one of the command words is describe, which is say what you see, and another one is explain. And explain is the really tricky one, the one you want to be watching out for. So describing characteristics of tropical rainforests can be they're very hot or they're very wet. Now that's not a good description and they're not very good characteristics to mention because they're too vague, but throughout the rest of this lesson you'll pick up a few more that you can use to give you a slightly more detailed answer. The next part is hopefully not only should you be able to describe them, but explain why those particular types of characteristics occur. So why is it hot? Why is it wet? And that's really, by the end of this session, something you should be able to do. Okay. So, firstly, just having an awareness of major rainforest locations around the world is useful. And the first thing you should identify, really, is that they are found, and we should know this already, they are found between the tropics of Cancer to the north and Capricorn to the south. The ones along the equator are called Equatorial, and that's where the biggest ones are found. So the ones I would pay attention to here are the Amazon rainforest, the most well-known, and that will be our case study in a couple of lessons' time. The Congo rainforest, and the rainforests of far Southeast Asia. Okay, so those ones, just to visualize where the major rainforests are found in the world. Don't pay much attention really to the Olympic rainforest because that is a temperate rainforest, so it therefore doesn't occur within the tropics, it occurs in the temperate zones. Okay, so we have covered in previous sessions Gersmehl models and what they are. So they show nutrient stores, nutrient flows, which are the blue arrows, input of nutrients, the green arrows, and output of nutrients. So what I would like you to do, please, is have a look for the nutrient Gersmehl models, which have all these different parts that are on 365, and cut them out and arrange them, and hopefully stick them in the right location so you can spot where each of these different sections should go relative to one another. It is a recap, so feel free to go back into your book to have a little look and see what it looks like. Okay, so what I'd like to do is, if you haven't got the right answers, just make sure these ones are correct. So you've got your biomass, which is the living material within an ecosystem and where the nutrients are stored there. As those plant and animal tissues die, that becomes the litter, Okay, so often we associate that with leaves because leaves fall off trees very regularly, particularly in our deciduous forests that we have in this country. But any parts of plants or animals that fall off, get detached from the biomass, become the litter. As they get decomposed by microbial organisms, things like worms and maggots and bacteria, they then transfer those nutrients to the soil store. And to complete the cycle, the biomass, through their roots, uptake those nutrients through the soil. And there you go. That is the main stores and flows of nutrients in a Gersmehl model. But you also have inputs of nutrients from rainfall. And if there's too much rainfall, some of those nutrients get lost in runoff. And weathered rock, so essentially nutrients that actually come in from below here, the parent rock or the bedrock, they will weather and add nutrients into the soil from below. But some of that can also get lost when moisture through leaching, so rainfall that soaks into the soil, can wash away nutrients from it as well. Just like if you've got dirty clothes, the washing machine will pass lots of water through them to wash away the dirt. Okay, so similar way, nutrients get leached from soil if it's very, very wet. Okay, so in a tropical rainforest, and you've got this handout to help you, in the tropical rainforest we look at three main characteristics: the nutrients, the structure, and the soil. So the nutrients, here is a diagram, a Gersmehl model, which has been sized to show you where most or fewest nutrients are. So you can see that the biomass is where loads and loads of nutrients are stored. You can also see where there are big movements and flows. So there's lots of nutrients getting uptaken by the biomass from the soil, and that makes sense because there are lots of plants. There's also lots of nutrients very quickly being moved from the litter to the soil, and that's because it's hot and wet. So anything that's fallen off a tree or an animal decomposes really, really quick. If you want to decompose anything quickly, make it warm and damp. Like a banana will go black very quickly there. But if you want to reduce it, you make it cold and dry. And that's not really something that rainforests are being known for. And then also you can see these large arrows of inputs or large arrows from leaching or weathering are because largely tropical rainforests rain a lot. And that means you get lots of precipitation coming through. You don't get much nutrients getting washed away from runoff, because they're evergreen, so there's not really that much litter to wash away. But you will get lots of leaching from the soil, and you will also get lots of weathering because the temperature and the wet mean that chemical weathering is faster, so there's nutrients that can get added through the soil that way. Now what I'd like you to do is annotate this diagram, but I've been really generous. I've provided you from your handout on 365 all the labels and annotations you need. You just need to put the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 on this diagram where the label belongs. So number 1, biomass, should go next to the B because that's where number 1 is. All right, so label this 1 to 7 to start with, and then also add the labels A, B, C, D and E where you think these things are happening. So where you think there is rapid decay because of heat and moisture, hopefully you would spot that would be between the litter and the soil, because the litter is going to rapidly decay because of heat and moisture. And hopefully that is fairly self-explanatory, and you'll build up a very well annotated labeled diagram of a Gersmehl model for a rainforest. Once you have done that characteristic, you can then move on to the structure, and you can identify, and again, use online to look up anything you're not sure about. These are very common information. You'll find it in textbooks, you'll find it online really quickly, or in the revision tutorials that I provide as well, which are on this YouTube channel. Label the different layers, the 4 different layers of tropical rainforest structure: the emergent trees, the under canopy, the shrub layer, the canopy, not necessarily in that order, hint, hint, and annotations that describe what those layers are like. Okay, and again, not necessarily matching in the right order. And then finally, for the soil, there's just 3 annotations. So where does A go, roughly on the diagram? Where does B go and C go? It's very self-explanatory. If you read the annotation quite carefully, it'll give you lots of clues as to where you might find that. Okay, so that should take you in the region of about 10 minutes to complete. So if you pause the screen and crack on with that for 10 minutes, and then when you're ready to go, unpause the screen and I'll go on to the next section. Okay, so just to go with you through some answers, you should find number 1 here. Number 2 is here next to the L for litter. Number 3 next to the S for soil. Leaching occurs through the soil or out of the soil. So, oh, where's my cursor gone there? This is leaching, so that's number 4. Number 5 is there. Number 6 is there. And number 7 is here. Letter A is on this arrow here. Letter B is on this arrow here. Letter C is right next to number 5 here. Letter D is right next to this one here, which is number 7. And letter E is this one here. Okay. Right. Number 1, the top trees there, the emergence. 2 is this third layer down here. 3 is the bottom layer, and 4 is the canopy layer. Letter A, the thickest layer, is the canopy, which is here. Letter B, the tallest trees, there you go. Letter C, right down the bottom. And letter D is the under canopy. Sorry about the typo, it should say thickest rather than thickets. And lastly, letter A, thick surface debris, near the surface, surprise, surprise, here you go. B, weathered bedrock, okay, again, around this area. And then C, where leaching and nutrients of nutrients occurs most and decomposes, break down nutrients. That's just below the surface layer. Okay, so there we go. A, B, and C on those diagrams. Now we've got a really good understanding of the different kind of characteristics of rainforests, which now no year 7 in the world should know unless they're an absolute genius. Okay, right. So moving on. Just to recap as well about what the difference is between biotic and abiotic factors. Biotic, the living parts of an ecosystem, and abiotic, the non-living parts. So, for example, biotic can include vegetation, can include mammals, insects, birds, microorganisms, and all of that together is called the biomass. And the abiotic can be the air, the land, the water that's there. The climate is an abiotic characteristic. Soil, parent rock, relief and drainage, all of those things, they're non-living, but they can determine what sort of biotic things can live in that particular environment. So that's a good recap to get some notes down. If you haven't, again, pause the screen to get those notes down. I'm just going to crack on through. And this is now your opportunity, hopefully, to reattempt that exam question you started with. So what I'd expect to see is that your first attempt probably has a few, maybe 1 or 2 very brief characteristics, but maybe not to do with structure, soil, or nutrients. So your second attempt should hopefully incorporate some of the information you've learnt from this session so far. I'd like you to include an explanation as well as a description. Okay, so try and include which means that, or this is because, to get those explain question answers. Okay, that's the really tough bit of this. 3 key terms should be easy to fit in there. You've got loads now. There's things like relief you can talk about. You could talk about emergent layer, canopy layer. You could talk about leaching or runoff. They're all key terms that you've picked up from the session so far. And just keep an eye on your SPAG. The reason you should keep an eye on your SPAG or SPAGs, specialist terms as well, is because there is a spelling, punctuation and grammar marked question worth 4 additional marks in this particular topic for the 8-mark question. So always keep in mind when doing this topic, is my SPAGs good? Because it really should be to get those 4 marks, or as many of those 4 marks as possible. Okay, so reattempt it. Spend a good 10 minutes to 15 minutes doing that, so you've got a really detailed answer, so you are exam ready. And then we are just going to finish off the rest of the introduction to tropical rainforests. So rainforests, we've already said, are one of the most diverse places, and certainly the most diverse terrestrial parts of the Earth. And they only cover 7% of the surface, despite actually holding 50% of all species found on Earth. So that's pretty impressive, really, for a small land mass. And they're diverse because of the environment that they've got. We've already kind of covered that, really. In terms of adaptations, you need to be aware of at least sort of 3 vegetation adaptations and 3 species adaptations. Now, the vegetation adaptations, I've picked 9 here, which are all quite specific. Some of them need a bit of finishing with, so you can add a bit more detail. But my advice to you to complete your handout is to pick 3 of these 9. Read through all 9 and then pick the 3 that you find the most memorable. I mean, I always seem to remember buttress roots, drip tips, and epiphytes for some reason. Okay, but you can pick the 3 that you find most memorable and then jot them down in the table that's on your note-taking sheet. So have a little good read of that, pause the screen. That again will take you in the region of about 5 to 10 minutes to do properly. Make sure you write down and extend any that need extending. Now following this, okay, and ready to move on to the next one, is a little bit of, it says homework, but this is just to do by yourself if you're doing this from the home learning session. What I'd like you to do is just find 3 animal adaptations, and if you can find 3 different animals and how they're adapted to living in the tropical rainforest, then that is also just additional information which will help you should you come across it in an exam. So I've given you some examples. The Madagascan serpent eagle, how is that adapted to the tropical rainforest? The Madagascan lemur, both obviously found in Madagascar. The Amazon tree boa and poison dart frogs, how are those things maybe adapted to surviving in tropical rainforests? Okay, and the very final thing, so once you've done that research, again, don't take long to do that, 5 to 10 minutes maximum to complete that part of your sheet. It's only just completing that table just to get it done so you've got a good broad detailed introduction of tropical rainforests. The last thing I'd like you to do, please, is just to complete this copy and complete. So I will go through the answers in about 5 seconds. I'll be quiet in a second and you can do it. Pause the screen, make sure you attempt it yourself. Don't just cheat and wait for me to give you the answers. Off you go, and that will complete your sheet and a really good detailed introduction about tropical rainforests. So pause the screen now. Okay, so hopefully the answers you got were: places with an equatorial climate lie within 5 degrees either side of the equator, equatorial. The main areas are the drainage basins of the Amazon and Congo and the extreme southeast of Asia. The temperatures are high and constant throughout the year. The small temperature range of 2 degrees Celsius is due to the sun always being overhead at a high angle. Equatorial areas have high annual rainfall, in excess of 2,000 millimeters, mainly due to convectional thunderstorms, which occur most afternoons. Other characteristics include high humidity, a lack of seasonal change, and a daily weather pattern that remains uniform throughout the year. Uniform means, fairly standard, doesn't vary very much. Okay, well done for getting through that session. That has given you a really, really detailed introduction to the tropical rainforest biome. Next session, we're going to start to look in more detail at some of the issues surrounding tropical rainforests before we look at a case study of the Amazon rainforest in more detail in the 3rd session for tropical rainforests later. Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.